All right, good morning. Welcome back here to Trader Minute. Great to have you aboard. We're about 5 minutes here away from the market open this morning. And if we look at S&P futures here, they're up about 16 points, which is about a 20-point open higher when we include fair value here. And so sizable move here in futures. You can see where they were overnight. Down here at 27.11, shortly after the European session opened, and then really just climb back the entire night or morning here, and about 35 points off of those lows. So it's a pretty sizable move, about on par with the moves we've been seeing overnight in terms of the ranges there, and even the ranges we've been seeing throughout the day in the market. Now, the turnaround here is fueled a little bit by some oil. We saw a little bounce start to come into oil around that time, and oil is up about $1 since that time. Where the market hit those lows, there's some talk out there about the S&P and oil kind of moving hand in hand and all of that. There's a little bit of that going on, but I don't think we're talking about anything too dramatic right there. But overall, we're dealing with a market that's still kind of in this trying to find its value, trying to find its range. And it's one of those where, we've had the big drop and then the nice pop and now the correction to that pop. And, really the market's just still trying to feel things out. It's really easy. It's one of those where on days where the market's red, everybody believes all the bear stories and we must be going into a recession. And when it's green, it's all, oh, wait a minute, this is overblown. It's all, it's all great. Everything's fine. And that's typical for the markets. That's kind of the MO of the markets here. And we'll continue to see that. But in all, not a lot of major change here overnight. We're not exactly talking about all of a sudden something massively changed. Now we did have U.S. President Trump hold off on the auto tariffs, which does kind of give a little bit of trade war hope or trade resolution hope in this whole equation. So that is a net positive type of development here this morning. We have, Apple getting downgraded this morning and not trading lower, right? That's a big deal. We've talked about Apple and Apple's kind of that, canary in the coal mine here. We see Apple start to outperform the market. Markets are going to go up. And yesterday we didn't see Apple outperform the market. This morning, downgraded. You can see Apple started trading down around 191. It's been climbing back all morning, up about $3 off of those lows after that downgrade. And so it's one of those where, okay, is this downgrade something that, is this downgrade something that basically marks the bottom here for Apple? And this is the kind of candle that I love, and it's the type of candle where on a gap up it's normally very buyable, but you get this you get this downward move, you get this candle that that basically opens up, rallies through the day, and then falls right on back down. And, this is something that, a lot of people look at as bearish, but ultimately when you look at it after downward trends, when you get this type of candle, that tends to be quite bullish, and the confirmation on it is a gap up the next day. And so we're going to get that gap here in Apple. Here this morning, the trade is very easy. You buy it, stop on yesterday's low, and that's the trade, the technical trade there with it. Excuse me. That's the technical trade here with it, and the setup there for Apple. There are other stocks this morning set for some interesting gaps, like Nike, which had similar action to Apple yesterday. Rallied, fell on back. So very interested to see how some of these open up here early on this morning. We'll go do a quick scan here for some of these gaps and look for some gaps above the sevens, but that was the bell. Bell just rang. Before I look at the price action too closely, if you look at the S&P, the S&P futures, it made this kind of high volume bump right here about an hour before this market opened. This is on the CPI data, which is inflation data, and it came in at a hot number, but it came in as expected, right? So it was like a 7-month high in inflation, but came in as expected. But when you look at the number, housing, no real inflation. Food, no real inflation. The inflation number is being propped up by energy. What does the market know? Well, energy has gotten rocked. So that's not going to be a sustainable thing. It's not going to show into next month. So, the market is taking that as a lighter inflation number, even though it's kind of a 7-month high. But the market's not viewing it because if you look at how it's, what the components are, the action is due to, or the high is due to the energy component there of the CPI. Okay. Now just looking here at some of the action, you saw me pull up that Nike chart. This is one I had my eye on here this morning. You can see the gap. Sometimes gaps are really easy to talk about in theory, but we're 1 minute into the market open, and this has already moved 2%, right? So really tradable, that gap? Option tradable? No, not at all, right? I mean, if I come and look at Nike and, we look at the options, yep, the options are open, but we're not talking about major volumes coming in. The spreads are still pretty high, not exactly tradable on that gap right away. We have to look at it and say, okay, it's up $1.82. The options are still kind of expensive. We still don't see a lot of volume coming into the options. Do you really want to get in? Do you really want to, test that, or do you want to kind of wait out a little bit? And generally, when we get this type of move, I do want to wait just a little bit there for it. But that's one I had my eye on here this morning as a possible entry to just buy personally. And then Apple, very interested to see how this holds up this morning. It's up about $1 here early on. The options are fully open now, so it's not like that has to wait. But you can see here on stock charts, it's taking in the pre-market action and pricing that in. It always does that in the first minutes of the market there on stock charts. But if we come into the minute chart, you can see pretty much the action has been all down here on Apple since the open. Now, that's not necessarily bearish. We saw all the action to the upside yesterday morning, and that wasn't exactly bullish. So it's one where may get an opportunity there. I may buy a few weeklies here in Apple today and see how they go. Real quick, going to just pull up a few other stocks that had some gaps that I find interesting. Micron here. Interesting gap. Not interesting enough though. Let's see here. If I could just, all right. But you can see it's erasing the last hour's action from yesterday, but the last hour action from yesterday wasn't exactly a hard sell, wasn't exactly some sort of landslide or big sell that's getting erased. This one, probably the options are not open yet, or the spreads probably haven't come in yet. But Bluebird Bio, this was upgraded this morning, and you can see it sold off about $1.50 into the close yesterday, and it's erasing that gap on this upgrade. This is one I'm going to be pricing out the options on, kind of seeing what that looks like. I love how some of these bios made this just really nice upward move, big, good volume upward move. They've fallen back on some lower volumes. They've fallen back right into retracement areas. And, it's one where I look and I say, okay, is this my opportunity to get in, or are we going to kind of drub around on this lower retracement area for a little while? But something like Bluebird Bio with the upgrade today, does it have a better chance of holding up? I do believe it does. So I believe I take a little less risk by jumping into something like this. But you can see the option spreads on it right now. They're pretty insane. Yeah, they're pretty insane. So this is a shares trade, for at least for me, going forward here today. And I'll have a closer look at that here in just a little bit. U.S. dollar down 3 cents. Not exactly a monster move there, but we do see the FXI up another % here this morning. Kind of keeping with some of that outperformance theme there that we've seen here in the last throughout this week. If we look at some of these China components, things like an FCX, very interesting level. I mean, we're seeing some stability come in right here around 11. To be a buyer here at 11, expecting a lower high to come in. That's a very tempting proposition. There's a lot of these stocks like FCX that are starting to see contracting Bollinger Bands, and the market action that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 days is helping to drive some of this with many of these stocks, and it's a very interesting period. Yes, it's still below the 7s, so it's not something I can look at and say, you know what, I expect it's ready to go here right now. But setting up some decent, at least risk reward, and some decent floors at least underneath a few of these names that are out there. But whenever we have a gap like this, I like to look at those stocks that are gapping above the 7-day moving average, right? That just have a gap. Where yesterday it closed below the 7, and today it's opening above the 7. That's simple. I'm not looking for anything overly complicated there, and I'm interested to see what those stocks are, right? And there are 49 of them in the S&P 500 today. That's a pretty big number. Generally, when that number is that big, it tends to be pretty bullish, at least for that day, right? And you can look at who some of these names are. The Intels, NVIDIAs, Oracle, so there's some tech in here. CSX, we looked at this a little bit yesterday. Pulte Home, PHM. This is one that really interests me in terms of the home builders and, what we're seeing in this space here, what has gone on. And let's see, maybe it'll let me bring it up. Maybe it won't. Let's try this again. There we go. But you can see, nice rally off of these lows. Has had a nice little pullback consolidation, and today fresh gap above the 7, though it's counting the pre-market action still. But very nice move there in Pulte Homes. We did see Home Depot downgraded this morning, so to see some of the home builders hold a gain today would be pretty impressive overall. But anyway, we look at this open. It's a fairly bullish structure. In terms of the open, I don't know that that means a heck of a whole lot, at least yet. But if we look at just kind of this sector summary here, energies, got a little bounce in it here today. But consumer discretionary, right? Retail, tech, industrial, materials, right? They're on top. Who's on bottom? Utilities, consumer staples. So this is not a market gap up and it's just a really conservative gap. It's a market gap up and a little more aggressive, a little more bullish type action here on the gap with that structure. Now again, we're only 8 minutes into the market, and you know me, I never like to look 8 minutes in and say, hey, you know what, this is the be all end all here. But overall, it's one of those where generally you look at it and you say, okay, bulls have a little more advantage than what they had yesterday, in this uptick this morning. But we're not breaking any real key levels. We're not, we're not in one of those positions where you can really look and say, ooh, market, okay, you know what? It got its silver bullet news here today. It's ready to go. It's just, it's ready to burn up on fire. This is just something where, you look at, your individual stocks and you say, okay, does it have some price action? that gives me an entry point. And if it does, you go ahead and and take it. For me so far, just kind of looking down this list and looking at where things are, I don't have enough that I feel overly confident where I feel, hey, you know what, this is going to pay off. There is something like an Apple that, it does have a decent risk-reward scenario, right? I mean, it's got a decent risk-reward scenario, buying it using yesterday's low, so I could go out and do that. If we look at the hourly chart here on Apple, we gapped above the 7-hour. So far it's not holding on to that 7-hour, but did get that gap above the 7-hour there, and could make that trade off that. In fact, if we were running the challenge right now, I would probably take about $500-$700 and go ahead and make that trade. And it is a trade that I do think is very valid here, from a risk reward and a signal standpoint, with what this morning looks like out there in the market. Okay, let's see who else was on that list. CSX was on that list. Let's come back to that list here, and I'm just going to pull up a hourly on CSX. You can see not only is it gapping above the 7-day moving average, gapping above the 7-hour moving average, right up towards this upper band as the bands are now starting to expand. That's a very pretty entry, a nice risk-reward entry using this gap as a stopping area, and very nice setup there with something like CSX. So if you've been looking for an entry point on something like CSX, it's decent. I wouldn't say, hey, you know what, the odds are 80-90%. I put the odds around 60% that it will be, the next little bit will be higher. But CSX, this is one of those where I expect it to hit new highs on the next market rally, and so I'm a little more willing to go and jump into something like a CSX. But that pops off the page a little bit here this morning. Let's see who else is on here. Costco, Triple M, interesting. CME, Bank of New York Mellon, that's interesting. Triple L, Lockheed Martin. Okay, so we have some of these defense contractors starting to show up on here. Okay. Let's go take a quick look at those. Defense contractors, let's just Lockheed Martin here. Gap above the 7. Okay, they're just kind of inside the price action for the last 2 days. So nothing there that I look at and go, oh, this is fantastic. This one's interesting, UPS. And you'll notice I brought this up with the defense contractor stocks. Why? Because the chart looks the same. It's same type of chart as many of these defense contractors, and we have a lot of that out there. But that's a very interesting chart here on UPS. And again, it's adding some of the pre-market action into the daily chart. But if you look at the hourly chart, that fresh gap above the 7-hour moving average here. So we have quite a bit of that out there this morning. So in all, quite a bullish open in just terms of the overall mix. If you look at something like the VIX, it's still elevated. Yeah, it's down just a little bit, but it's still elevated. There's still some nerves out there for sure. And that's not going to go away. But in terms of just this open and probably path of least resistance, it's probably going to be a little bit higher, at least early on. And the stop points are actually pretty easy this morning. And again, Apple, my favorite here this morning, just with the pure price action here on it and how I expect that it will trade. In fact, it's something that you look at it now, it's up about $1.80. It's up about 90 cents when we were talking about it earlier, up about $1.90 now. It's something where, you could just put a stop on, hey, if Apple goes red today, pull it, move on. Take a small loss, move on, and be able to run it that way here. So, interesting open, and one that definitely has more bullish advantages to it than bearish advantages to it. And it's just different than what we have seen. one that may provide a little bit of stability in some names here throughout the day, and some key levels that can be traded off of ultimately when it comes to this gap. And I think, if we are going to be talking about a market that its next big swing is to the upside, right, where we've had the dip, we've had we've had an upside. We had the upside rip. We've had the dip into the retracement areas. If we are going to be talking about a market that makes that next move up into this upper Bollinger Band, I think that today's gap is going to be one of those that is looked at and said, okay, that was where the price action signaled and showed a little bit of difference there, and where the market just showed a little bit of difference from what the pullback was here overall. Okay, so anyway, those are my thoughts here on the open. Again, Apple. If I were running the challenge right now, I'd be in it right now. But those will be some of the type of trades we'll make here with the challenge launching, kicking off here on Friday. Absolutely looking forward to it, but am slowing my trading down here a little bit this week, both personal and whatnot, just to have a little bit of a break. But very much looking forward to ramping it back up and really getting out there and taking advantage of some of these opportunities that are created on mornings like this, where there is no silver bullet, there is no mass consensus that things are great, grand, and wonderful, or that things are falling apart, but there's just price action that is just a little bit more predictable than some of the flat or some of the monster gaps, that we see out there. And so we'll be looking to take advantage of that here going forward. But, CSX this morning, Apple this morning, very, very nice setups overall. Thanks for hopping on. I'll be on a little bit later here this afternoon talking about or doing a couple trainings, and we'll talk to you then. Take care.